Hey everyone, welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ, your go-to source for insightful conversations on human-centric AI readiness, talent transformation, responsible innovation, and the future of work. My guest today is Paul Rubenstein, veteran executive at Visier, whose current role is Chief Evangelist and Talent Strategist, after previous tours of duty as their Chief People Officer and Chief Customer Officer. I've had the pleasure of knowing Paul for a few years now, and he is one of those rare people who is as fun to talk to as he is insightful. Paul also loves to challenge your thinking, and in a world where it's easy to stay in your echo chamber, that keeps me honest and on my toes. In this conversation, we get into Paul's 3 curves framework for CHROs, navigating AI, the human-machine efficiency frontier, the ROI curve, and the humanity index, along with why workforce planning is finally having its moment and what it actually takes to keep humans at the center of your AI-powered transformation. Paul brings a ton of insight, some great advice, and of course, a healthy dose of humor to this overdue conversation. Thank you as always for listening. Let's go talk to Paul. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver, and with me today, I am fortunate to be speaking to Mr. Paul Rubenstein. How are you today, Paul?
It's sunny in Vancouver, and it's the start of beautiful season here, so awesome.
That's one of my favorite cities on the planet, so you're fortunate to call it home. So, Paul, I wanted to start with just giving my listeners a little bit about your background, your career trajectory, and what you're doing now at Visier.
Like, who am I?
Yeah.
Is that a question we wake up every day? Like, who am I? I think, it's funny. I'm having like one of those like, oh my God, milestone birthday is going to be coming up reflections. And it's not cool anymore to tell anyone what's your job. It's like, well, what do you believe in? What do you do? And I had to reflect a little bit. Like, I have to say, I've just been so shaped and driven by this ridiculous obsession. It's not ridiculous obsession that the HR function can and should and deserves to be better than it is. And I think there's a lot of amazing potential that's still untapped in it. And I've just been gravitating towards that in every single job I've ever had. And I've come at it from every angle: practitioner, from consulting for a long time, from serving other heads of HR through analytics and services here at Visier. And it's just so that's sort of been one passion for me. And then the other one is something I learned later in my career to just be obsessed about. And that is like, how do we make decisions and how do we make trade-offs? And quite frankly, how do we make better decisions? And I'll never forget the first time I saw modern analytics that could be consumed by mere mortals. And I was like, damn, if everybody could see the data and everybody could see the patterns and consume it, we would open it up to, it was the ability to unlock the potential in everybody, in every team and in every organization, because managers would be like wide open. Bias would fall by the wayside. Objectivity would reign supreme. And we would see the real human truth that I think lies inside all of us. And so like I've been driven by that for years. And it's taken me through like years of consulting, HR transformation projects, strategy projects, all that kind of stuff. I got to go deep in science, leading teams of industrial psychologists for a couple of years. And that was amazing. And leadership and assessment science. I've had some amazing, I'm blessed to have amazing opportunities. And then, the last 8 years here at Visier, just being on the edge of analytics and data excellence, and then being so fortunate to have the position we have in AI to have made it real and consumable and accessible so early in the market with such high fidelity and impact. It's many blessings, Bob. I feel really lucky.
I mean, I've watched this outside of HR, in my career, but I had similar observations being in roles like, managing, social insights, market intelligence, because when I was at IBM, my customers were internal, right? So we were basically providing insights as a service, and it was a royal pain in the ass. I mean, we had, teams behind the scenes doing all of the legwork, and then my team would basically interpret that and poke and prod and try to do, I think, what you've espoused many times, which is, how do we ask better questions so that we are making sure we're even tracking, the right metrics of success? Is this leading us in the right direction? Do we trust the data, which is a whole nother, topic that perhaps gets in the way of people relying on data and being more objective as opposed to trusting their instincts and, bringing their biases to decision making.
When you say it like that, a lot of people are like, hey, you talked to a lot of executives and they didn't want to invest in certain technologies, especially analytics, right? Analytics, whether it's people analytics or anything, has always been one of those funny things, because if you're an exec, you get the data you want. But what you don't see is all the paddling below the waterline of that swan that delivers the Excel spreadsheet, right? Yeah. Of course you get everything you want. There's a mountain of people. I think, now and at an increasing rate because of AI, the tolerance for what it takes and the manual labor that's actually behind the scenes in delivering a lot of analytics is, people are like, no, you know what? No more. They want zero distance between them and the insight. And so the role, I think, of an analyst is changing because of that. And the relationship with technology is changing because of that, right? The human-machine mix in analytics is definitely changing just like everything else because of AI.
And I think one of the things that we're going to cover extensively over the course of this conversation, I'm sure, is how that plays into human centricity, which has, that in itself is a broad term. What do we mean by that, right? It could be everything from psychological safety and well-being to, believing in human potential to, trusting our experience and our intuition and things like that, and then complementing that with AI.
Can we just actually dive right into that, Bob? Because I think that's important. Because I think there's a lot of the energy around AI is amazing. It's an amazing opportunity, right? Like I tell people, this is Y2K, folks. There will be a before and an after in our technology infrastructures, but more importantly, there'll be a before and after around work. Like if anybody's old enough to remember what work was before the boom in tech and outsourcing and shared service and everything that came after Y2K versus before, you're in for a faster, more amazing shift. And I think it's really important for anybody who's listening to connect with and if you're a head of HR, to connect with 3 curves that I think everyone should be following, right? This is how I think about the framework for the CHRO to think about AI and if they're keeping pace with it, right? So like this first curve that I'm obsessed with right now is, borrowed from portfolio theory. I like to think about the efficient frontier of the human-machine mix, right? So there's sort of this curve, and we're getting nerdy already. There's this curve to follow. And like, if you think about it, every job almost has a portion that could be agent. And your ability to change the labor costs and adopt agents is part of you keeping up with the competition, right? You don't want to fall behind, but if you go too far ahead and, make things too agentic too quickly, you risk failure, you risk operational risk, productivity risk, reputational risk. But if you go too late, you risk missing the cost curve and losing your competitive advantage that way. So there's this sort of sweet spot that everyone's looking for to keep pace with, right? And I think that's the first thing that everyone has to keep in mind. And that has implications for how you design jobs, how you plan the workforce, and all this other stuff. The second curve is a classic ROI curve, right? So if I'm spending money on AI, am I getting a return on that investment? And what is the right pace, right? You don't want to rush that pace, but you don't want to fall too far behind. Again, if you rush it, you might push the efficient frontier curve too fast and have business risk. But the third one's important too. And that's the humanity curve, the humanity index. Because I think people have to remember 2 things. Number one, you have to have a place where people want to work with the agents and work with the robots. Getting and training an agent and cooperating with it is a selfless act. It's asking people at the core of their culture to work on work, not just do work. And second of all, we're going to come to a place where all things being equal, everyone will have access to the same agents. And then we're right back where we started, where it's like, people make the difference. And what kind of a humane workplace do you want in the age of human robot mix? So 3 curves: efficient frontier of the agent human mix, the ROI curve, because you're going to spend this money, people want to show results, and a humanity curve. It's more than just engagement. It's talent density, it's productivity, it's a whole bunch of things, who stays, etc.
On the first piece points to what I have been describing as strategic work planning, not workforce planning, work planning, right? That's specifically to not anthropomorphize agents as part of the workforce, but I don't want to get into that necessarily, that debate, but I think it's important to, what should agents do? What should humans do? And understanding that. On the second piece, on the ROI, I guess I'll say this, even though you kind of covered it in the third piece, but AI ROI in my mind is not just a technology calculation, right? It's people, process, data, and technology. And so if you don't pay attention to all of those, particularly the non-technology pieces, you're going to be in trouble. And I would say the investments that you make in AI would include investments in AI literacy and readiness. And then the human piece, the third piece, is an absolute, no-brainer for me, because, like, as I was just alluding to, if your people aren't ready to drive this, and you don't have the communications, the transparency, and the investment, and making sure that people understand why we're doing all of this, and enabling them to help you push forward, to responsibly innovate, to make better decisions, to ask better questions, then where does that lead you?
I wholeheartedly agree. I want to go back, though, to something you said, about anthropomorphizing the agents. It's interesting. It's an interesting concept. And I'm a little bit mixed on that, because I've been watching people in the field do different things. Like, I was talking to somebody who now has 164 agents in their workforce. Okay. Those agents have a spot on the org chart. Those agents have an email address. They have somebody that they report to, so that that person is responsible for the outcomes delivered by those agents. And it's not a technology person, it's an operational owner of the set of tasks. And that person isn't just monitoring the technology, they're sitting there thinking, like, how could this agent perform better, right? What is the scope, et cetera. So and that person is accountable for the decisions made by the agents, which I think is really important, because they're like good interns. You got to train them. You got to own them. They don't own you, right? You control their destiny. And I think that's really important to formalize that through accountability, right? You have power over these agents.
I understand your point. And I think I guess I'm just trying to play Switzerland a little bit on that topic. But you're right. I mean, these agents are ostensibly doing a lot of the work. They're taking some double-digit percentage of the work off of what's scoped in a current, human role, and that human role may need to be rescoped or what have you. But I guess I was curious if this ties to one of the trends in your recent report that talks about manager experience, and the manager might not necessarily be this gets back to the same question. Are you a manager if you're just managing agents, or is a manager still a people manager, right?
I think, at the end of the day, you as a manager, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get the team to be as effective as possible. And good managers clear barriers for their team so that the people can focus on those things that are most suited for a human to do, right? And gets the most out of people and their talents. And the notion of curating the set of activities into the best resource to do it so that you can unlock the potential of individuals in your team is still core to a manager's role. And so, you'll see org charts, I believe in the future, more common where it's like, hey, I have these 3 people and these 2 agents. And the org chart is a concept, right? It may not actually show up the way we think about it, but it will definitely show up in the workforce plan. Because, when you go back, like, what did you say? A certain percentage of somebody's job could be done by an agent, right? If we go back to first principles thinking, right? Which is where we have to go if we're going to get the real returns, not just the financial returns, but the overall lift to our economy and advancement of society, right? That comes with every great technological progress. We have to get to some sort of intentional redesign and reconstruction of work. Because right now, most, I don't know about you, but most of the companies that I talk to, they're stuck in what I call the gym membership phase of AI, right? It's like, hey, everyone, I went out and I bought Copilot for you, or I bought GPT or Claude or something for you. And what has the experience been? The fit get fitter, right? They turn out hey, I can't save an FTE, but I can save like a hand or an arm. And you can't lay off a hand or an arm to recover your technology investment. The old mechanics don't work. You have a choice. You could fill that extra labor moment with something truly humane and truly intriguing and truly market changing, right? Or you can recombine the jobs, but at this point, like calculating the ROI on some of this stuff is like going to the CFO and saying, CFO coming to you and say, show me the ROI on email. There's like an expectation at work that you get an assistant for a lot of workers, especially, in tech and knowledge work nowadays, right? And it's not just tech, it's biosciences. Anyone in some sort of a management or knowledge work. You use AI, don't you, Bob?
I've been known to dabble.
Okay. If somebody took away all your subscriptions right now, would you be upset?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
The floor for the tools we expect at work has just risen. AI is one of them.
When you talk to organizations, have they made the necessary investments in not just the technology, but the what I call the human-centric AI readiness? Have they made the investment in people so that they know what good looks like, so they know how to use it for more than Google search and drafting job descriptions and emails? I mean, are they using it? We talk about moving people to higher order tasks, higher value tasks, maybe customer facing, revenue generating tasks, and spending more time doing that. But are people actually helping others realize the ways in which they can do that so that they can see how they can contribute more and perhaps learn new skills? And
Hey, it's Libby DeLucian. If you're sick of business advice that sounds cute but doesn't actually move the needle forward, this one's for you. The Libby DeLucian podcast is where we go one layer deep. No gurus, no glitter, just straight up unfiltered talk about scaling a business, running a household, and holding on to your sanity in the middle of the chaos. If you're the bottleneck in your business or in your own life, I'll show you how to fix it. Simple, tactical, and one layer deep every time. Let's go. Visit libbyd.com and check out our podcast today.
I guess increase their own potential to succeed, because I still feel like we're crawling, I guess.
It's incredibly uneven, and it's incredibly, if you're a futurist like us and want to see things go fast, the pace of change is not keeping up with, quite frankly, what now I'm not a stock guy, right? But like, it's certainly not keeping up with the expectations of the financial returns on it. And I think there are a couple of interesting observations that I can share with you. Like the first one is the reflexive action of people with a new technology is to train them, right? Hey, everyone, we gave you Claude. We're now going to send you to Claude class and show you what you could do. Okay. And that's reality. That's a lot of how we've always approached technology, right? Let me give you RTFM, everyone, before you touch the technology, right? And I'm going to send you to class. I may even give you a certification. That's one way. Actually, that's not where I see organizations struggling. And one of the struggles, the struggle I have is the courage gap. The psychological safety required to perform activities that disrupt your own job, right? That's a real thing. And people have to see those behaviors modeled and rewarded. Otherwise, they may sabotage the machines. If we go back in history and we think about automotive manufacturing and we think about Toyota, right? Gave rise to an entire explosion of lean and Six Sigma engineers and total quality management and a whole revolution. They created a culture and a management system that taught people to dance with these robots. We would say, hey, let's sit. The robot should do this. We should do that. And, that pace, and they kept up with it. The reverse was GM and Ford, which, you had people sabotaging those robots when they first came out, right? But it's a question of what is the leadership responsibility to create the culture? Incentives, right? There has to be an incentive for me to self-disrupt work because we're entering a phase and where it's moving fast. A lot of this work that we're teaching agents to do isn't documented, right? It's in people's heads. So you have to willingly give it up. That's a thing. And I think HR has a huge place to play here. And the second thing is, like I said, the people are in the gym membership phase. I think there's a second phase people are experiencing, which I call the proliferation of prompt boxes, where like every tech they see has a prompt box and they all think it's ChatGPT. But this third phase, which is the intentional re-engineering of work, like only some companies have entered that because it's hard work, right? It requires this active deconstruction of tasks and reassembly of jobs and an active decision to redesign things, right? And that's tough lifting. And I think a lot of the skills, the Six Sigma engineers that you'd throw into everything, running a Kaizen, right? Doing activity-based costing. It's funny, but I feel like the manufacturing firms who have always been good at that will outpace the tech firms who have just born process that was digital and has a lot more inertia. I think there's some advantage to that. The fourth phase, by the way, is AI as a management system. We should talk about that if we have time.
Some of what you just said really, well, let me just pick out one thing that's sticking with me is doing the hard things, right? I feel like so much of AI in the headlines or even these, what I consider sort of vanity metrics around individual, productivity, it's so much of the noise is like just people finding these shortcuts. I'm not saying shortcuts aren't great as long as you're not outsourcing your critical thinking and your own, sort of curiosity and your human attributes. And so don't outsource those things because those are the durable, skills and attributes that you're going to need as AI gets even more powerful. But I just think about, even, just as we're just watching Artemis 2, go around the far side of the moon. I still prefer dark side of the moon, but go around the far side of the moon and just hearing, the old quotes from JFK and others around, we don't do this because it's easy. We do it because it's hard, right? And people are like scared to do the hard things. I don't know it's certainly not, a waste of anyone's time to do this, because if you care about the long-term implications of your company, your team, and your own career trajectory, you have to set yourself up for success and understand what are the fundamentals to get right. Just like everyone's jumping into AI without even considering where the data that it was trained on came from, right? So there's just so many basic things that we need to think about, but we also need to understand how do we truly change the future of work? How do we change the future of education? It's not by just, giving every student access to Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity. That is that is an implementation, a technology implementation step. It is not adoption, let alone, empowerment.
There was a piece this morning about a professor who's actually the dean, is an engineer at Northern Arizona University, and how they're changing their courses because of AI now, right? They're like, we have to teach people how to interrogate and question what AI gives them. And that actually makes them better, scientists and engineers. And, we've gotten complacent with Googling, right? The internet told me to do it, right? AI amplifies the worst part of that behavior, but opens up the capacity for us to spend more time. And the convenience gives us the capacity to spend more time interrogating and questioning, right? So I think those are good schools. I am stupidly optimistic about the future of humanity. So I may not be the best person to talk to about this. Fear gets way more clicks than hope.
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'll let you know after what happens.
I'm curious to see, you also said something in there about, what we train the AI on, right? And I know you've done a lot of work on responsible use of data, information, right? And this is core. And it's interesting. I've had very different discussions lately about this, because there seems to be a conundrum emerging in these around governance. Because, I wonder if we're starting to enter the age of govern in instead of govern out. And what I mean by that is the default from all the lawyers and all the specialists is hey, restrict, err on the side of restricting any technology's access to this data. But we have an expectation that we want the AI to give us good answers. And good answers, right, isn't just about the quality of the data, it's about the breadth and the context of that data, right? So, how do we balance those two forces, right? We've got to use governance, I think, in the future more to exercise the data in the field with a shift towards secure personal accountability and responsibility for use, rather than just restrict it. God forbid somebody might make a mistake, because without it, a lot of the AI will lead us down the wrong path or give us blinders on. Right? And I fear that, right? I think that's where bias comes in. We talk about, a lot of people are afraid of bias by how we train the algorithm and how we program it. I worry about bias because we restrict the amount of things the AI can see. So it gives this false impression that it's all knowing, and it isn't, unless you open the aperture.
That scenario happened to me like a couple hours ago, actually, with one of the AI. It was actually a really good AI assistant, except for the fact that it didn't have access to data that I knew was in the app. And they purposely and deliberately did not give the assistant access to that information. And it drove me bonkers. Like, don't tell me I'm crazy. Don't tell me you can't do this, because I know it's there. I'm in the app. I see it. I want a report that shows me that and all things like it. It wouldn't do it. It drove me crazy.
Did you raise your voice?
I did not.
All caps?
I did not. No, I did. No, actually, I did. I did do a couple all caps, because it said, do you want me to, open a service ticket? Capital YES. Yeah, obviously. Obviously, we're not getting anywhere. So yes, open a ticket so I can talk to a human being. So yeah, we've got to, these tools have to be trusted for sure, but you've got to know, this is one of the other things why people take shortcuts, because you don't know enough about the context, or you don't have the domain knowledge to ask, and you get an answer that sounds pretty good, and you run with it, right? And so that, I guess I'll flip this question to you, but my hunch is that, when we talk about empowering decision makers with analytics, whether it's people analytics or anything related to the business, if you make that insight and that information available through that prompt box that you're talking about, if you make that available anywhere and somewhere someone doesn't know the hypothesis that went into driving, the metric, and doesn't know how they're just going to take what shows up on this dynamic dashboard at face value and go run to whoever and be like, well, here's
Yeah.
here's what my team came up with.
Bob, we've had that challenge ever since the first analyst produced a spreadsheet, and, the glossy effect of a bar chart and a graph when people see, weren't used to it. It's like, oh, it's pretty data. It must be right? It's got a halo effect. That has always been true. And again, we have to learn responsible use of any information, and we have to question they used to teach a course when I was a kid of information validity, and you had a hierarchy at the library, right? It was scientific journal. I'm going to get it wrong. Scientific journal, then encyclopedia. No, then it was news article. Then it was encyclopedia. Then it was like newspaper. I forget what it was, but you were taught this by the librarian. And I think those are incredibly important skills. The flip side is, this is an amazing, amazing opportunity for anybody who works in people data or HR systems to, the opportunity here is to collapse your distance to insight for all the good work you do. But in order to do that, you have to change your thinking from engineering just people to systems interactions in your headspace. Hey, somebody comes and looks at my chart and graph. Somebody comes and logs into Visier and looks at it, right? And you have to start thinking systems to systems. I think there are the top candidate for HR's Employee of the Year, I think is going to be the MCP server, Model Context Protocol server. Because what does it allow the analytics function to do? It allows you to say to many other systems with governance and security, hey, here's important data that could be relevant. Combine it with your other data. Hey, learning system, as your prompt box gives an answer, you would know better about assigning this course if you understood where this person was in their career, or how many managers have they been through in the last year, or what does their performance look like, or what jobs did they have? What is our rich digital footprint, right? Things we rely on people to give good context to everyday decisions, we can now start to at least tackle a chunk of it, right? The easy stuff with this type of technology. So analytics as a answer factory, right, really grows up right now and becomes a way of making other agents more intelligent. And that's actually like the coolest thing I see the Visier customers doing right now is they're reinventing HR's service delivery model. They're coming up with an orchestration layer. So there's an intentional navigation through these different prompt boxes. And they're making each of these agents smarter by taking this rich digital footprint. And by the way, it's not just a footprint of the HR systems. In this footprint, it might be work, like for a salesperson, show me their productivity data or things like that, right? And they're now answering questions that aren't just asked by employees or HR people, but they're answering questions asked by managers. Because if you're a manager, getting back to your point, context is king. And if you have to spend your time stitching data together and figuring out and triangulating what is the real truth, you're probably going to leave a couple of data sources out. But the more we can, and hey, anybody listening, if you work in HR, get out of HR, go talk to a line manager, work backwards from how they make a talent decision and the challenges they face every day to all the way through all the layers and requests and systems, et cetera, back to your data model and understand what do they really need and how do I collapse that distance to insight for them? And that's the headspace of the future. AI is your friend because if you understand it not just as a prompt box, but as a system of management, you can now collapse your personal distance to impact on all the outcomes that you need to drive, all those individual moments you need to drive for your company to stay on strategy and outperform the competition. And that's a different headspace if you've been heads down trying to answer the most obscure question through, R and a SQL or your own private data set, right?
Yeah.
This is at scale. This is impact at scale.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about the first wave of chatbots, right? Like 10 years ago. And it was like, it wasn't just that they couldn't really interact in natural language and have a conversation. It was that the scope of what they had access to and the way in which they were really trained was completely different and archaic compared to, the capabilities that we have now. In fact, when I was at NBC Universal and we were evaluating some of those technologies, the first question I got from a bunch of SVPs was, well, like, what if but this is only for, this IT help desk. Like, but we also need this for, this domain and that domain or whatever. And then people get.
Hey there, I'm Tim Boris, host of the Working Well podcast, where business strategy meets human sustainability. If you're an executive, a leader, or change maker ready to ditch burnout, build thriving teams, and drive real results, this is your next must listen. Tune in on the Work Defined Network or at timboris.com/podcast.
Decision fatigue, just figuring out which of those boxes to enter because they're not connected at all.
Delegation fatigue. It's like walking into some union shop, right? No, sorry, he does that. I only do this. It's a different union, right? And the expectations are that we connect all this into one experience. I will tell you, though, there are important lessons from even training the early IVR systems at call centers that gave way to those chatbots. Yeah, the lesson is you train them. The customers who are really experiencing the best experiences in AI, especially as using it to interrogate analytics, all the B customers, are the ones who sit and say, what are people asking? Did I like that response and how do I tune it, right? We spend a lot of time tuning the AI, right? Just like you would train an intern. And by the way, it's exponential. It goes like you do a little bit, you get some, you do a little bit more, you get a lot, you do even more, you get a lot more. It's fascinating how it works.
When you were talking about the way that these systems are interconnected and the orchestration or whatever, I was wondering if you could just expand on that, because you mentioned before, like AI is part of like your sort of operating system or whatever. I thought you could just sort of unpack your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think what you're asking me is describe what I call intelligent service delivery model for HR. So we all know the old school delivery model, right? Hey, push everything to tier 0. What they can't handle goes to the call center. What they can't handle goes to some more specialized labor who's tier 2. What they can't handle goes to even more specialized and more expensive labor in tier 3. And maybe tier 4, you pass it back off to the HR business partners again. We're back to a generalist sort of thing, right? Which they resent because it takes time away from them doing real strategic work. You get the whole model. It's been tried and true for ages. Well, now people are doing a couple of things, right? Number one, they are, you'll hear everyone talk about the fight for the orchestration layer, right? Hey, I want to be that modern coin sorter, that modern IVR that understands your request, knows what system fronted by an agent to take it to. That's part one. And that's just having an intentional service delivery experience rather than a find your own way and click through each one, right? The example is, when you want to register for a course, but you want to ask about what's my permission to take this course, you ask the learning system, but that's actually in ServiceNow, which has the policies or something like that. But each system doesn't know, but you treat it like it does because it's a rectangular box that looks like Claude, right? And this is where that intelligence comes into play in this model context protocol server, MCP servers, right? And this is everything you always loved about APIs, but didn't have the documentation available around, right? It's a broadcast system. It's a data exchange passport. It's all these things that are emerging in this layer that says, hey, I know I can make each of these agents have a bigger context to answer that question, right? And start to really have informed behavior. That's where it starts to get intelligent. Where it gets really, really smart is when you understand the shape of your workforce, the existing and desired shape of your workforce. This is everything in analytics. And this is where you start to mimic finance a bit. Because if you can turn and say, overall, or for this division, or for this location, or for this unit, right? This is my expected turnover or desired turnover. This is the existing. Hey, I know when I see people of a certain tenure or a certain network, right? I understand their contagion effect. I have to alert, right? Oh, I've seen this many managers unstable within a certain band of employees, or I may have a comp issue, whatever that might be. Setting those thresholds to automatically say, oh, you're asking about this issue that isn't just about calling data, it's calling the strategic plan. I'm digitizing the strategic plan. Now I can give you even more context to think about as you make a decision about whether to retain an employee, right? What if you have your workforce plan in there and Bob quits? You're like, hey, Bob, I should replace Bob, but should I? Should I replace Bob, or should I consider our overall cost strategy? Or should I consider some internal talent? Or I can now take, because I understand the shape of the workforce, I understand the workforce, I can intervene and start to scale at a rate that we can't do with HR business partners to give that first layer of advice, right? That's transformative for HR. And by the way, I can take these alerts and signals, and instead of fitting it in HR's service delivery model and waiting for people to come to HR, I can now engage managers in the surface of their work. I can, shocker everyone, some people avoid HR, okay? It's like they anything not to talk to an HR person. But if you can bring them something of value without them having to engage you on your terms, and you can engage them on our terms, on their terms, that unlocks and opens the aperture for the CHRO to really start driving organizational effectiveness at the scale of the CFO through data. Because now I can say, hey, I'm good at describing my workforce plan and metrics digitally, just like the CFO is good at describing the P&L and the financial strategy digitally. I'm able to send people information about it. I'm able to see who picked up that information and didn't. And now I can start to hold them accountable and understand which managers are effective or not, so I know where to spend my time as a leader. That is a huge upgrade on the execution of talent strategy. And it leads to a better execution of business strategy, because you know what? Like, bad talent decisions take a quarter or a year to show up. If we can, in the financials, if we can get them early, it's like if the CFO or CEO is always like, if I had been in the room when that happened, we would have made a different decision. I would have given them the experience and advice. Now we can reach those people at scale. But doing it through AI, which is how people are going to expect to have it, is only as good as your data strategy, as your understanding of the problem. So it comes back to the here and now. You got to start data maxing. You got to understand the day in the life of a manager. You got to start doing systems to systems interactions. It's all there for the taking. The question is, are you going to be ahead or behind? And the ahead or behind, it's not like 6 months, 18 months you can wait, right? It's now like, I think, quarter by quarter, to keep pace from a cost and competition perspective is really important.
I think when HR can step up and understand context and sort of preemptively, give you information that you may not have even realized would be helpful, that goes a long way to building the credibility that I think HR has been looking for in terms of moving to that strategic function, whether it's talent advisory, whatever label you want to.
It's how marketing builds brand. It's how marketing builds brands in the digital age.
That's right.
You got to, it senses what's going on without you seeing it. You may not even see it. It knows your sentiment. It tailors the message. It gives it to you in a timely and relevant fashion. And it measures which information you took action on or not. Same thing.
Circling back to one of your observations from your workforce trends report, which was around, AI as your first mate, I think you called it. Like I say co-pilot with a little
But
c,
yeah,
but
first date.
first mate, yeah, first mate. Humans are still in control, but just having that as sort of your navigator in some ways, right? Like, this new information just came in. I think it might be relevant to this presentation you're about to give next week, or this talent decision that you're about to make. Maybe Bob doesn't need to be replaced. Maybe we can backfill him with, 2 agents and I don't know,
I
whatever.
want my workforce plan to be as easy as Google Maps. Give me traffic
Yeah.
updates and help me reroute.
So that leads to my other thought, which was around the orchestration and the dynamics, right? The real time sort of dynamic nature of how you need to think about planning. Sounds like something you do and then you go execute, which is sort of true, but it also these days it seems like it's more than that. It needs to be constantly evolving.
I was with a customer the other day and they were telling me how they're doing their annual workforce plan. They're revisiting it twice a quarter. I'm like, well, why do you call it an annual plan? It's like, I don't know, right? But I think the new way to think about this is you have to design, plan, and operate the workforce in a continuous fashion, right? And you have to do it all on the same set of data, and it has to be real-time data. There can't be any because it has to be continuous, like the financials. You have to be able to always look for gaps and opportunities to whatever your workforce plan is. Your workforce plan has to be constantly dynamic, both for inputs and outputs. And you're not just planning people, you're planning technology in many cases, agents, or just the way, your strategic workforce plan. We're entering the golden age of workforce planning. It is sexy again. It is no longer, Mark Berry called it the Rodney Dangerfield of HR, right? Again, and respect, right? But no, it is essential. It's as essential as the FP&A function is to finance. Constantly being able to look at multiple dimensions, right? So if you just used to doing FT and headcount, well, no, you're going to definitely do location, and you're definitely going to use skills. You're definitely going to use the shape of the workforce, maybe spans and layers. And by the way, it's going to be broken down on a portfolio basis. It isn't going to be one set of metrics that you apply because sameness does not yield greatness in a talent strategy, right? You're going to really be able to deconstruct the portfolio and describe it through numbers and update those numbers and constantly show people gap to plan. That's the operate part. And that's also where the accountability part comes in. But I think by good analysis, you actually have to design the workforce before you can plan it in a more continuous fashion, right? Right now, we're applying AI without redesigning work or people or organizational systems. We're just letting it find its way. Smart money is going to bet on this design, plan, operate so that you can design in real time. People want to design orgs and jobs the way Tom Cruise looked at data in Minority Report. They want to see the real stuff. They don't want to see charts and graphs. They want to move boxes around and have data update. They want to be able to, in real time, make trade-offs. Oh, I'm going to increase my cost a little bit, but I'm going to my people cost, but I'm going to totally decrease my real estate cost, right? Or whatever combination you come up with in the future.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I guess as we wrap up, Paul, because I want to let you go, and we could talk for another hour. Otherwise,
we can go 4 hours, Bob.
I know.
There's lots to talk about.
We'll have to do another session on Substack or something where we can just talk and talk. But I know you're a busy guy, so that's not always so easy. Just kind of closing thoughts about how we stay human-centric as we adopt, more, deeper, intelligent analytics and AI as a complement to what we do to enhance, human potential. Just, I guess words of wisdom for the listeners, and anything else any other knowledge you want to drop.
The robots are not coming from your jobs for your jobs. That's as soon as you hear that, that's clickbait. Okay. Go study history and how many times the Bureau of Labor Statistics has, reported jobs increased. Every technology revolution has increased jobs. It's increased the quality of our lives, right? Yeah, some people lost, but more gained. And we tend to hear more about the losses because they play into our fear. And, some of this is progress, and I don't mean to be cold, but, we have agency over how we retrain ourselves, over how we learn. It's just cold. This is going to sound especially cold coming from someone who is CHRO, but don't rely on your company for your career. You have to have ownership. You are responsible for your training. You are responsible to stay relevant. You are, and I think the best way to do that is to stop working every day and come to work and think about how you are getting your work done. That headspace, that first principles thinking about what am I doing and why am I doing it? What's really important will lead you in the path to good choices about what should be an agent and what should be human. And by the way, also understand your brand. When I think about that humanity index, right, which is really important for everyone to understand, what is it going to be like when you come out of this at the end and all things being equal with everybody having the same agents? People matter. So what kind of a workplace, what kind of culture, what kind of incentives, what kind of a workplace do you want to be, right? So you really need to be intentional about this and the choices you make, because just because you can automate something doesn't mean you should. It might be it might be off brand for you. And so you have to think clearly about this.
I love everything you just said because it validates so much of what I've been talking about and a presentation I need to give next week to a community of people on the back nine like me, and making sure they're not outsourcing all kinds of things, including having an appreciation for what they're capable of. And like you said, maintaining their own agency to course correct and don't forget about what the labor market data is telling you. You're capable of a lot, and you don't necessarily need to work for someone else to find meaning.
And the most important thing you should do, follow me on LinkedIn.
Yes, please follow Paul.
Bob, it's great to see you.
You too, Paul. Thanks so much for doing this. This has been great. And I'll let you know when this comes out, but I will drop a couple links in the show notes to Visier and your profile and that workforce trends report.
Take care. I'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks again, Paul. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.